Greetings. Welcome. Hope everyone's having a wonderful evening, wonderful day. Hope my microphone is a little louder than last time. First off, I just want to start by saying thanks for joining me. Secondly, sorry for the delay. Those who joined me for my last live. Anomalous America, North Dakota was due last month on the 18th, but I got a pretty nasty little respiratory infection and was down for the count and couldn't talk for a few weeks, and then the holidays hit, so I figured I'd jump back into the material, kick off December, kind of where we left off. I mentioned in that video we'd be doing a little Mandan deep dive as part of the kind of preview for Anomalous America, North Dakota episode, just because I'll be covering the Mandane Indians in that episode, and I have probably 10 hours of material on them. So I wanted to do a short video, probably not too short, actually, probably at least 2 hours. This one's going to go, but it definitely was worth it, worth the material and worth the time. So, yeah, welcome. Thanks for joining me. And yeah, we got a lot of stuff to cover. So I think we'll just get right into it. Thanks for being here, Mr. Biggs. A lot of familiar faces, a lot of new faces. Sherry, good to see you. Thanks for being here. At least I got one mod. Yeah, hopefully I'm reaching everybody. But yeah. So again, we're going to kind of go all around here. We'll talk mostly about the Mandane Indians, but we're also going to get into a little Prince Madoc material. Talk about the correlations between Prince Madoc, the Peruvian Empire, the Montezumas, and how all that kind of correlates. We'll connect a few more dots between the Irish and Etruscan material, talk a little bit about Freemasonry, the origins of Freemasonry among the Indians, and yeah, we're going to kind of go all over the place. So let's get right into it. I'm going to start this one off with a little reading some old posts from Twitter and going over some old newspapers, and then I have some full-length articles, and then we'll dive into a few books. It's going to be a lot of reading, so hopefully if you're even following my channel, you're familiar with a lot of reading. Source material, right? I am the archivist. But again, thanks for joining me. Mandan's Lost Atlantis. I love to hear about any connections with the orientation of lodges to solstices, equinoxes with the Mandans. Wow, yeah. Well, I won't be going that deep, but I've talked about how nearly all of these I don't want to say antediluvian, but perhaps post flood would be a better these kind of ancient cultures, they lined up all their cities celestially, right? As above, so below. And there wasn't a culture that didn't follow that in some way. Pre 1700, I'd say even 1800s. But yeah, let's jump into some material here. And thanks for joining me tonight. Welcome, everybody. Okay. So again, a heads up for everybody. Anomalous America North Dakota episode will be live 4 p.m. Thursday. Thursday the 4th, just a few days away. I'll be posting a kind of layout outline to the episode on Twitter and with a few little excerpts here and there on Instagram. So those of you who follow me on either of those, be paying attention if you want a little bit of a peek into what I'll be talking about there. But here we go. The Mandans, Indiana, 1833. According to their traditions, they were the first people in the world. Some 1,500 miles up the river, Missouri, above the Mamones, will be found the Mandans. These people, as well as their neighbors below them, have some very peculiar religious notions. Mr. Catlin, we're going to talk more about him and get into his book here later on in this episode, who visited them the last summer, has given very interesting accounts of their religious ceremonies, customs, and traditions. Of the latter, he has given one specimen which contains more of the wonderful than any of the visions of the seer Joseph Smith, and we believe quite as worthy of credence. According to their traditions, they were the first people in the world, and they originally lived inside the earth. They say that a vine had grown from one of their cornfields to a very great height through a hole in the earth, and one of their young men climbed up it until he came out on the top of the earth, where the Mandan village now stands. That he looked around and admired the beautiful prairies and country about him, saw many buffaloes, killed one, and found it good to eat. That he returned and related what he had seen, when a number of them went and witnessed the same things. Now, isn't that a funny story? Right? Jack of the Beanstalk style? Right? Taking the beanstalk up to the land of the giants. Amongst the throng who was endeavoring to climb up was a very large fat woman who was advised not to go up, but whose curiosity led her to attempt it, notwithstanding as soon as she had got an opportunity. When she had got part of the way up, the vine broke under her weight and let her down. She was disgraced for being the cause of a great calamity, which could never be averted, for none could ascend, nor could those descend who had gone up. They commenced the Mandan village, where it now stands, and the remainder of them are living underground to this day. Now, throughout this video, we're going to make a lot of connections between the Mandan and the Welsh, the ancient Britons, a little bit of a Celtic overlay too, but you know the Welsh have an incredible story. I wouldn't call it their origin story because there's mixed into several stories, but they talk about a fabled land underground where they came from, and it has a lot of Eden vibes. There was no war, there was plenty. Yeah, very interesting. A lot of quote American Indians have inner Earth origin stories. The Hopi, Shoshone, a few others. But yeah, we're going to move on to the next one. 78 of you are joining me. Thanks for being here. Try to do a better job of looking at the chat now that I got it here on the window with me and I can see it better. Box Saga says that where humanity comes from, Finland, hell, out of the inner Earth, where it's tropical and gigantic. Absolutely. Love the Box Saga. The Welsh were melanated. Yeah, I've shared a lot about different books, you know, the ancient Britons, a few others that mention that. Yeah. Right, because the closer you get to pre-ice age, we were all melanated. the changing. When the vapor canopy fell, it all changed. All right, next one. This is one of my favorites. Mandan religion, Virginia, 1835. The Indians were Jews. Mr. Catlin, of whose portfolio on Indian portraits we have frequently spoken, is, we perceive, lecturing at Mobile. We trust he will soon make his way to the northern cities. Indians are no rarities, but rather a nuisance to the people about there. To us, they are becoming subjects of historical interest, and therefore magnified in importance. If the following, related by Mr. Catlin, is as we find it in the Mobile Commercial Register, be a true narrative, it is certainly a most extraordinary and unexpected conformity of the truths of the Bible. The ark must therefore have landed on Chimborazo, or the Alleghenies, and the Indian tribes that once populated this country must have been the descendants of Abraham. The origin of the religious ceremony of the Mandans is both novel and interesting. It is probable that no white man was present at its celebration before Mr. C. and the gentlemen who accompanied him, and their tradition connected with it of a stranger coming to them from the west, who had saved himself from a great flood, and found on land on the mountain in his canoe, has probably been first made known to the white man at that visit. The season of these ceremonies is the budding of the willow, and the reason assigned is that the bird flew back with a sprig of willow. On being questioned what bird, the reply was the mourning dove. The whole tradition upon which these ceremonies are founded is a matter of speculation for the curious. Through it means the origin of these wild people may perhaps be traced. So yeah, I mean, that's incredible. We'll get a little farther into that explanation as we get into Catlin's books. But what a correlation there. And for those of you that have been following my material, this is just par for the course. We've shown over and over again the biblical correlations, especially throughout Anomalous America. It's quite endless. What's this next one? Yeah, this is a good one. Prince Madoc and his colony, 1845. Hopefully we can see this. Do I need to zoom in a little bit more? Can't zoom in anymore. Hopefully you guys can see this okay. We'll get into some PDFs, some full page articles here in a second. I'll be able to zoom in a little bit more so you can read along with me. I don't think I'm going to read this whole one just for the sake of time. We got a lot of stuff to cover, but here we go. Mr. Catlin conjectures that the polite and friendly Mandans were of Welsh origin, many of them having complexions as light as the half-breeds. Among the women particularly, many there are whose skins are almost white, with the most pleasing symmetry and proportion of figure, with hazel, with gray, and with mildness and sweetness of expression, and excessive modesty of demeanor, rendering them extremely pleasing and beautiful. Mr. Thompson introduces a letter published in the Gentleman's Magazine in 1740 from Mr. Morgan Jones, who resided for a time in Virginia and afterwards sailed to South Carolina, whence, with 5 companions being in want of provisions, they traveled through the wilderness to Tuscarora County. Here he found an Indian, Sachem, of the Dogs, who spoke Welsh and was civilly treated for 4 months, during which he preached to the tribe 3 times a week in the Welsh language. Now, there's been at least 5 different groups, separate groups, of, quote, Indians that had Welsh words in their language, could completely understand and speak Welsh or had a good blending of the two. But the focus tonight is the Mandans, but we'll discuss a few others further through the Anomalous America series. Father Richard of Detroit stated to the Reverend Jedediah Morse that in 1793 he was told at Fort Charles that 12 years before that time, Captain Lord commanded that port, who heard old people observed that Mandan Indians visited them, who conversed intelligibly with some Welsh soldiers in the British Army. So this was in Detroit. In 1810, soon after the publication of Mr. Sutherly's poem Maddock, a workman in London stated to a friend of Mr. Thompson that in his youth he had traveled among the Indians in the northwestern part of America, and that on one occasion he and his companions had fallen in with a light-complexioned tribe of Indians with whom one of the party, a Welshman, carried on a conversation in the Welsh language. There is, then, strong reason to believe in the story of Prince Maddock and his colony, and that to a recent period traces of their existence were to be found among our Indian tribes. Now, again, like a lot of the problems with some of these stories is we're trying to flip the script on a lot of this, right? Because we're always looking at it from a traveling from Europe to America. 88 of you in here, wonderful number. Thanks for joining me tonight. Kind of a last minute thing, so I'm grateful to have each and every one of you here. Wasn't really planning on doing this today, but I just wanted to get the month started off on the right foot and get into some material and get ready for Anomalous America. So again, if you joined me since I said so, Anomalous America next episode, South Dakota, will be Thursday, December 4th at 4 p.m. Pacific. I wanted to talk a little bit about this book. This is a French book about traveling up the Mississippi. It's just a pictorial description. It's where I got the cover, the thumbnail for this. Super interesting image. Super interesting image. Just looking at these earrings and the face shape and the pipe, the earrings especially. This image I shared this image probably 6 or 7 years ago, but just thought it was incredible. This is a Catholic. I know the symbol's used by many denominations, but predominantly. And also wanted to cover some of these other pictures here. You've heard me talk about star forts and that America is covered in star forts just like Europe, but many of them were deconstructed or are still remain buried from a massive flood that covered North America, and how a lot of the Civil War maps and pre-Civil War maps show these quite clearly. And the story is that the French built them, but you'll see that the French actually were saying that the British built them, and that the British were saying that the French built them, and then they were saying that some of them were in ruins pre-French, and that they had to say that they were related in one way or another to the quote Indians. Some people attributed to them to the mound builders. So the history of these forts in America are lost, but some really ancient ones here. Plan of St. Louis. I mean, just incredible here. Let's go through a few of these. Upper part, Mississippi here. You can find them all throughout. I mean, I've shared a few maps over the years that show here's Cahokia, St. Louis, right? We talk about um, for anyone that wants to go a little further into this, you can um, Jillian or Sherry, if you wouldn't mind linking, excuse me, um, my video about the discovery under the Mississippi Bridge between St. Louis and Cahokia. Let's go look here real quick. Give me a second, guys. Ancient citadels of an unknown race. That's a good one. Mississippi, the oldest river on earth. Another good one. And then, is the Mississippi the real Nile? You won't believe what they found under the Mississippi in 1869. When they were building the first bridge here, they uncovered some ancient tunnels. And they talk about that many of the pyramidal structures were linked by underground tunnels. But anyways, that's if you want to go back looking through some older material. Yeah, I just wanted to show that image real quick. I just thought that was interesting. And, you know, this is 1750. But yeah, let's get into some PDFs here. There was a few other ones I wanted to share. Something I didn't actually mention earlier, but in the oldest newspapers, the Mandan were called the Mandane. Really interesting correlations too with my Anomalous America Utah episode where I talked about the Danites and how that related to ancient America. But yeah, I'm not going to go for there. Let's get into some PDFs here. Which one do I want to read? I think I'll save those actually, and we'll get into the books. Yeah. We'll finish off with these PDFs because they talk about other Welsh Indians found throughout America. And that'll be a good kind of summary. And then we'll talk about masonry amongst the Indians, amongst the Mandan especially. And then we'll talk about the Welsh Bible found amongst the Indians. But yeah, we're going to jump into America Discovered by the Welsh by Benjamin Franklin Bowen, 1810. Okay, 118. Big jump. Thanks for joining me, guys. Appreciate you all. Mandan from the tribe of Dan. Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. But yes, absolutely. Starfort molded gauge. Yeah, I have a lot of videos for anybody interested. Just go through my library. I talk about ancient buildings, ancient castles, fortifications, crazy discoveries, blah, blah, blah. And if any of you in here haven't followed along with Anomalous America, I can't recommend it enough. Start in episode 1, Alaska. You'll see I cover all the kinds of crazy stuff that's been left out of our history books found through each state. It's literally the same thing all over the world. Who'd have thunk it? Yeah, right? Hey, miss, good to see you. It's been a long time. There was a split of the Saxons in the middle 500s. Yeah, I mean, it's all a grain of salt, right? My lens has been a bit more focused on ancient America, so I kind of look at things from a exploring what was lost or concealed, or that's kind of my niche. There's obviously going to be opposing viewpoints when it comes to any of this stuff because it's all, not all, but a lot of it is conjecture. I mean, obviously, we still have a large chunk of these amazing structures that still survive here, although we're no longer allowed to explore them or, discuss what actually was unearthed when these places were first explored. Why was America the last frontier, so to say, when it came to uh, publicized exploration? America, Central America, South America was explored to a greater extent and documented more so than North America and Central America up into the 1800s, which makes it such a wealth of information. And yeah, that's kind of what my channel focuses on. If you weren't already aware, Alaskan pyramids. Oh yeah, pyramids, Noah's Ark. Alaska's probably one of my favorite episodes. um, Anomalous America is fantastic. So glad to be back. So few people are looking at this material. Well, thank you. Glad to have you. Hey, Brett. Everyone a little different now. Okay. So, like I was saying, America Discovered. This is an archive.org. If you want to dive into this book further on your own, you're welcome to. And we're starting here at chapter 11. The Mandane Indians. Who are they? During the present century, various travelers have called the attention of the civilized world to a small body of Indians inhabiting the banks of the upper Missouri called Mandans. They, with the Minetaris and Crows, are classed with the Dakotas and the Sioux, although it is known that their language bears no affinity whatever with the latter people. The Mandans are very light colored. George Catlin, the well-known student of Indian life, character, language, and manners, was, without any doubt, more intimately acquainted with this people than any others who preceded him or have followed him. Mr. Catlin was born in Wyoming, Pennsylvania, and was for some years a practicing lawyer. He removed to Philadelphia, and upon meeting with a delegation of Indians, resolved to employ his talents as a painter in the best school by painting man in the simplicity of his nature. Accordingly, he made arrangements to spend the most of his time among the Indian tribes of the Western country. His enthusiasm in his work arose to the height of an intense passion. He studied every phase of Indian life, nothing seeming to have escaped his attention. Withal, he was an ardent admirer of the Indian character, and he says, "No Indian ever struck me, betrayed me, or stole from me a shilling worth of my property that I am aware of." In another place, he says, with a touching pathos, "They are fast traveling to the shades of their fathers towards the setting sun." In his notes on the American Indians, he has portrayed a complete picture of the Mandans, giving the minutest details so that the reader can study them as well from his 2 volumes, as if he were daily living among them. Indeed, better than if he wished to visit them at present. They have been of late years so much reduced by the ravages of that fearful scourge, smallpox. Now, throughout some of my older posts, I shared quite an interesting story about smallpox being introduced and handed out. Gifts were given to chiefs and to other people, and smallpox was the first biological weapon, so to say. Although some say the plague was used in that same manner, and I'm sure you could go farther back. But smallpox was handed out in these containers. It was given as gifts, these spores, this kind of mold spore. And I shared these stories about some of the British giving these gifts, and that smallpox was introduced into all these different communities in an organized manner. And the numbers vary, but from what I've been able to find through kind of finding the middle ground of a million different sources, is that the Mandan Indians went from around 4,000 to 5,000, and within 2 years, their numbers were down to under 100. So, absolutely devastated by smallpox. After Mr. Catlin visited, the disease was introduced by one of the steamers of the fur company, which had 2 cases aboard. One reason assigned why so many perished was that the Mandan villages were surrounded by the hostile Sioux. Many destroyed themselves with knives and guns, while others dashed their brains out against rocks by leaping from the ledges. While the disease was at its greatest height, there was one incessant crying to the Great Spirit. The bodies lay in lonesome piles in their wigwams, and their remained to decay or be devoured by dogs. Some became crazed and plunged into the coldest water when the fever was raging and died before they could get out. Matatopa, 4 Bears, great chief of the Mandans, watched his tribe, wives and children, die about him, then starved himself, dying on the 9th day, his body prostrate over the remains of his kinsmen. Their numbers are now so reduced that the last statistics give them 400 only. When Mr. Catlin made his first entrance into this nation, numbering several thousands, he was struck by their appearance and at once concluded that they belonged to an amalgam of native and white. He was at a loss for some time how to account for this, and it was only after the most careful study that he reached the conviction that the Mandans were a branch of the descendants of Maddox's colony. He believed that the 10 ships of Maddox, or at least a part of them, either entered the Belize at the mouth of the Mississippi, or the colonists landed on the Florida coast and made their way inward. They began agriculture, but were attacked and driven to erect those immense earthen fortifications, and subsequently were driven still farther and farther inward. Mandans was a corruption of Mada. I won't even try to pronounce that. Welsh language is incredibly difficult to read for anybody who's even tried. A name applied by Cambrians to the followers of Madoc. For those of you that aren't following along, here's the word. Look at a Welsh dictionary and try. It's crazy. The following brief summary arranged by the writer of these pages may be taken as Mr. Catlin's principal reason why he thought the Mandans were Welsh. Number 1, their physical appearance. They were of medium height and stout. They did not share that high, stalwart physical frame which is so usual with Indians of the forest before they have become degraded by the vices of civilization. Their complexions were very light colored, but not uniform in shade. 120 of you, welcome again. For anybody joining late, it's good to have you here. Brett, good to see you. Their hair was of all colors found in civilized societies. Their hair of the unmixed Indian is a straight black. They wore beards, which Indians do not have. They must have been the people who were called the bearded Indians. They had different colored eyes, hazel, gray, and blue. Number 2, the form of the Mandan villages. Here it may be remarked that the Minataris construct their villages upon the same plan. They sink holes in the ground to the depth of 2 feet and having a diameter of 40 feet of a circular form for the foundation of their wigwams, which are built of substantial materials and display more skill is found among the other Indians. The method of sinking, number 3, the method of sinking down into the earth for the purpose of obtaining a foundation, has singularly enough offered a clue as to the authors of all those remains along the Ohio at the confluence of the Mississippi and the Ohio, and along up the Missouri to the present abode of the Mandans. Their earthen works and huts, built in druidic circles, are the exact counterparts of those along the paths of their migrations. Of course, the larger works have no modern counterparts, for those were erected when they were more numerous and able to cope with their foes. The villages of the dead are uniformly built in circles. Number 4, their social and domestic customs. They exhibit great skill in manufacture of pottery and the specimens found in the earthen remains of the Ohio Valley. Many of them at present in the Museum of Cincinnati correspond with many of the products of the Mandans. The Mandan women mold vases, cups, pitchers, and pots out of the black clay and bake them in little kilns in the sides of the hill or under the bank of the river. They possess secrets of manufacturing known only to themselves. They have extraordinary art of making very beautiful and lasting kind of blue glass beads, which they wear around their necks in great abundance. This must be the nation, or at least a portion of it, which Captain Lewis and Clark saw, and whom they declared to be light-colored, and whose manufacture of beads and glass articles they described 30 years before Catlin. Their canoes are the exact shape of the Welsh coracle, made of rawhide skins of buffaloes, stretched underneath a frame made of willows or other boughs, and shaped nearly round like a tub, which the women carry on their heads. The Welsh coracle, a boat which has been used by fishermen from time immemorial, is made in the same way by covering a wicker frame with leather or oilcloth, and is carried on the head or with straps from the shoulders. In their social and domestic habits, generally, they are different from other Indians. Number 5, their religious belief and ceremonies. There is something reaching the marvelous connected with their religion. Their traditional belief, one would imagine, was nothing less than a corrupted epitome of the Christian belief. Really important. A, the account of the transgression of Mother Eve involving the doctrine of the temptation is quite explicit. The evil spirit, who was a black fellow, came down and sat down by a woman and told her to take a piece of his side, which she did and ate it, which proving to be buffalo fat, she became insensate. B, the traditions of the deluge are far more rational and could be more easily believed than many which have been entertained by other nations. We talked a little bit about that earlier, right? Their tradition of the deluge is incredibly specific and very close to biblical tradition. The most important religious ceremony among the Mandans is a representation of the death and sacrifice of Jesus Christ. It takes place annually as soon as the willow is in full leaf, for they say the twig that the bird brought in was a willow bough and had full-grown leaves upon it. The spectacle presented in the crucifixion of the Savior by the young men of the Mandan nation might not accord with our civilized tastes and notions of property. Yet it is wonderfully impressive and calculated to turn the spectators' thoughts to the tragedy of Calvary. The finest looking young man is selected as the central figure, and the others surround him, when they are stuck full of skewers and suspended on beams around their rude temple where they worship. There's quite a few drawings Catlin made of this ceremony. Let's see if I can go find some for you real quick. Let's go back to my original post here. Here we go. So this is what it looked like. Quite grotesque, but interesting nonetheless. And these ceremonies are found, believe it or not, all over the world. Tribes in India. Here is their devil, the evil spirit. And for anybody that's familiar with the Nephilim looked like clowns material, this follows quite closely with that material. Very interesting. Night and day, some of their spirits, snake and beaver. But I mean, just crazy. Feeling the pain that Christ felt was their mission, which I think is just incredible. We'll get into some of the ancient biblical texts that the Mandan had. The Mandan language, number 6. In their own language, they call themselves Sipokamimakaki, the people of the pheasants, which Mr. Catlin thinks they would not do if they had not lived where pheasants abounded, as in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana. For there are none on the prairies within 600 or 700 miles of the Rocky Mountains. Yeah. And they say themselves that they came from the mouth of the Mississippi and that they were pushed by war up into the Missouri. Pardon me. The most convincing proof, probably, to the mind of Mr. Catlin and to all others who have studied the possible identification of the Mandans with Maddox colony, is found in their language. The resemblance in form and sound is so very marked that it cannot escape the eye and ear of any individual, much less those of a Welshman. It is expected that he would catch the soonest any similarity in the two languages, the Mandan and the Welsh. Unfortunately, there are too many instances of this similarity to omit for a moment the idea of chance or coincidence. That the reader may see that this is the case, his attention is called to the subjoined table of words selected from the English, Mandan, and Welsh and their pronunciation. I won't even try, but you can see the list here. Hopefully you can see it clearly. I'm going to zoom in a little more. It's listed here. In one of Catlin's books, he goes quite further into the words. There's 100 or more that he lists. Many other words might be given, but the above is sufficient to show the remarkable similarity of form, and that there were, and that were they to not agree as to certain letters, the resemblance was preserved in the pronunciation. Every language has its own individuality in respect to that. The Welsh is noted for its deep gutturals, and to the ear unaccustomed to hear it, it seems very harsh. Yeah, the Welsh language is incredibly complex to me, to my ear. I have observed this guttural pronunciation very extensively among the American Indians. Losing says that the language of the Uchis, the remnant of a once powerful nation who were seated in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and further west, was exceedingly harsh and unlike that of any other nation. Mr. Baldwin, in his recent work on ancient America, in his endeavors to determine the origin of the Natchez Indians, says, they differed in language, custom, and conditions from all other Indians in the country. He then attempts to affix their traditions with the people of Mexico. It may be remembered that elsewhere it is stated that it was right in the midst of the territory occupied by the Natchez that Mr. Willen, a rich Quaker, had amongst his settlers a number of Welshmen who conversed in their native tongue with the Indians. Also, that Mr. Burnell and his son, Cordog, were part of a company who purchased 40 millions of acres from the Natchez and the Yazoos, and that both father and son, particularly the latter, understanding the Welsh language, can converse with the Indians. It is not altogether likely, then, that the Uchez Natchez, being known to be very so different from the surrounding nations in language, spoke the same as the Mandans, and that the language of the three did not differ much from the Welsh. Dr. Morrison report of his tour among the Western Indians, performed in the behalf of the government in 1820, mentions upon the information furnished by Father Richard of Detroit, a report that prevailed at Fort Charles among the old people, in 1781 that Mandan Indians had visited that post and could converse intelligibly with the Welsh soldiers then in the British Army. Dr. Moore suggested that the information as a hint to any persons who might have an opportunity of ascertaining whether there was any affinity between the two languages. By a guidance more than human, Mr. Catlin was led into the midst of this people, and he has shown that such an affinity does exist, and has performed a service of permanent value by his contributions to the literature of a question which was thought to be a bold imposture foisted upon a credulous age by an equally credulous but more ignorant rabble. But time is making things more equal, and the sturdy defenders of Maddox's voyages, an American colony, are having his claims ratified in a most astonishing manner. It is very fortunate that more recent researches have brought to light the language of a people so rapidly melting away, and thus supplied an answer to the question as to how the many Welshmen who came in contact with them could understand and converse with these Welsh bearded Indians. All right, let's look at some comments here. Starting at the bottom. America's the old world. American Indians discovered Europe. Absolutely. This goes back to my Queen Moo series. It's in a playlist. What is it called? What's the playlist called? The Mayans built the Tower of Babel. That's not the playlist, but that's one of them. Arkine Queen Moo. There's dabbles of this in my Etruscan series, where we correlate the Aztecs and the Etruscans. But yeah, absolutely. We got a slightly different alphabet and say the end of a sentence first and begins at the end. You going there, are you? The English in the UK not got a clue what we talk like half the time. I'm assuming you're speaking of Welsh. Mums. Speaking of resemblance, the Currach, an Irish boot shaped like a bowl, is the same all across the UK, and what a coincidence the natives copied the same thing. Absolutely. Understanding conspiracy, yep. Absolutely. That's the one. Hoping I can get together with him. We'd have a lot of stuff to talk about, I'm sure. Jesus was what they call a green man, like Osiris, a resurrection deity, always an agricultural deity. Okay. Just want to thank you again for joining me tonight, guys. Monday night. Over 120 of you. Grateful for each of you. Thanks for spending your time with me. Viking runes deep in Canadian forest. Oh, yeah. I've covered the Viking runes from Alaska all the way to the Gulf of Mexico and into the Northeast. Absolutely. Druidic circles is a big clue. Absolutely. Native Americans are not called Indian. American Indians and Native Americans are two different people. And the American Indians did, in fact, have beards. Native Americans did not. Well said. We come from Atlantis. Aryans civilized the world. Yeah. The bearded Indians, the priest class, on and on. All right. Chapter 12. This is important, even though we're going to get away from the Mandans a little bit, but it's just showing the web. Welsh blood in the Aztecs. Mexico and Peru were the most civilized parts of the continent when the Spaniards arrived. If it had not been for the bigoted zeal of the Spanish priests, and the most signally that of Zumarraga, the abundant and astonishing national picture writings, which were the historical records of the Aztecs, might still be in existence, and served to reveal the successive links in the mighty chain of migrations of the early peoples, so that much of the mystery that still lingers in regard to their settlement and civilization could be removed. That's what we're working on. We're trying to rebuild those links, those missing links. But these priests looked upon those writings as the memorials of pagan idolatry, and having collected them together, committed them to the flames, thus extinguishing in a day, as it were, the history of a once powerful empire. The historian, and consequently forced to rely upon whatever fugitive pieces escaped the hands of those infamous ravagers. The study of the monumental remains and the broken and scattered remnants of this people, scarcely recognizable, found on the Mexican plateau and in the various parts of the American territories. Yeah, again, look throughout my playlist if you want to go deeper into any of this stuff. According to the most authentic records which remain, the Aztecs came from the regions of the north, the populous hive of nations in the New World, as it has been in the old. Clavigero, the patient and voluminous historian of New Spain, assigns the following dates to some of the most important events in the early history of Mexico. The Toltecs arrived 648 AD. They abandoned their country 1051. The Chichimecas arrived 1170. The Alcohuans arrived 1200. The Aztecs or Mexicans reached Tula 1196. They founded the Mexican Empire 1325. Conquest by Cortez 1521. Zorita, a celebrated jurist whose personal experience and observation among the Aztecs extended over a period of 19 years. Yeah, my son popped in here. Pardon me. What is it? Oh, okay. Well, let's get mommy, huh?
Mom sees my butt and come upstairs.
Yeah, you want to find mom?
And go in.
Daddy's talking to a whole lot of people right now.
Okay.
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 If you can't find mommy, come back and get me. Okay. I'm gonna close the door. Okay. Okay. I love you. Oh, where were we? Okay. Da, 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 da. Okay, where was I? I'm sorry. I may have to step away. So if that happens again, just a heads up. Dad first. Zorita, a celebrated jurist whose personal experience and observation among the Aztecs extended over a period of 19 years, and who returned to Spain in 1560, was indignant at the epitaph barbarian as applied to the Aztecs. Epitaph. An epitaph, he says, which could come from no one who had personal knowledge of the capacity of the people or their institutions, and which in some respects is quite as well merited by the European nations. So here's, a person. Yeah. You need my help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dad, I love you.
I love you too, bud. Can you go find mommy? And if you can't find mommy, come back to daddy's office, okay? And I'll help you. Okay? Okay?
Okay.
Look at me.
Let's sit down.
No, you can't sit down with me right now. I'll be done in a little bit, okay? Go find mommy. If you can't find her, come get me. I love you. Okay. Again. So like I was saying, here's a guy who's basically put in charge by the Spanish to kind of digest all the information they collected from these people. And here he's saying himself that calling these people barbarians was an absolute joke. And in some respects is quite well merited by the European nations. One and the same. Their high degree of civilization, their remarkable advance in knowledge and practice of the arts and sciences so wondrously displayed, in their architecture, their causeways, their temples, their homes, and their adornments, their agriculture and systems of irrigation, their floating gardens and their beautiful featherwork, their strange religion and military displays must have produced an impression upon the Spaniards which they never forgot. The vast wealth of the Aztecs so excited the spirit of avarice in them, however, that for a time each one planned how best to enrich himself. In complexion, they were much lighter than the common American Indians. Their style of dress, which was often the most elaborate and made from the finest materials of their own weaving, more nearly approached that of Europeans. Trousers, jackets, surtout, cloak, and cap or hat ornamented with fine featherwork. The same dress is worn by their descendants in Mexico at the present time. Their treatment of their women was not Asiatic, but resembled more that which is accorded to them by civilized nations of the world. Their duties were domestic, and they were not degraded by servile bondage. Throughout the different cities were barber shops, where the men assembled to have their beards shaved. No such thing was known among the American Indians. Quetzalcoatl, god of the air, says Prescott, instructed them in the use of metals, in agriculture, and the arts of government. It was the golden age. For some cause, he was compelled to abandon the country. On his way, he stopped at the city of Cholula, where a temple was dedicated to his worship, the massy ruins of which still form one of the most interesting relics of antiquity in Mexico. I have a video on that pyramid if you want a little bit more. When he reached the shores of the Mexican Gulf, he took leave of his followers, promising that he and his descendants would revisit them hereafter. And then, entering his wizard skiff, made of serpent skins, embarking on the great ocean for the fabled land of Tlapalan. And there, not here, the Welsh word lop, place, softened into tla, pel, distant, meaning distant place. Maybe in the future I'll try to do a little more on the Etruscan Aztec and all the correlations between the Peruvian languages, the Welsh, and the Mexican. He was said to have been tall in stature with a white skin, long dark hair, and a flowing beard. The Mexicans looked confidently to the return of this benevolent deity, and this remarkable tradition, deeply cherished in their hearts, prepared the way for the success of the Spaniards. Their religion was a compound of Christianity and mythology, of spiritual refinement and ferocity. Now, if you want more, go deeper in this, you can watch my Queen Mu series where we talk about Queen Mu. She brought the Christian story to Egypt, and we're told that it came the other direction, right? But again, we're flipping the script on directional, especially from these early Christian stories. Indeed, so much was the case that the most intelligent and judicious historians of the Aztecs could not resist the conviction that one part of their religion emanated from a comparatively refined people, while the other sprang from barbarians. Everything pointed to the doctrine that their religion had two distinct sources. Some historians have erred in supposing that they indiscriminately sacrificed humans. Their sacrifices were criminals collected from all parts of the country, kept in cages, and slain upon the same day to make a religious exhibition. This ought to be stated so that, if possible, there might be some mitigation of their dark and bloody practices. I've covered in some of my other videos that this is kind of the juxtaposition that the Christian religion came second to a more barbarous religion of sacrifice and blood. Again, conjecture. Showing timelines for these things is difficult, but the biblical stories align up with this, right? Idolatry, sacrifice, these things existed throughout the realm. And if you want to believe the Bible and take it literally, Christ traveled the realm and disavowed these practices and led these people away from those things. And their story follows this quite closely. They recognize the existence of one God, supreme creator and Lord of the universe. In their prayers, they addressed him as their God, by whom they lived, omnipresent, who knoweth all thoughts and giveth all gifts, without whom man is as nothing, the incorporeal, invisible one God of perfect perfection and purity, under whose wings we find repose and sure defense. They made confession but once, and that usually was deferred to a late period of life. The following was the language of the confessor for the patient. O merciful Lord, thou knowest the secrets of all hearts. Let thy forgiveness and favor descend like the pure waters of heaven to wash away the stains from the soul. Thou knowest that this poor man has sinned, not from his own free will, but from the influence of the sign under which he was born. I mean, that's an incredible prayer. I mean, just imagine hearing this from a barbarous race, as we're taught, right? Imagine hearing this prayer. Makes my hair stand up. He then teaches charity. Clothe the naked and feed the hungry, whatever privations it may cost thee, for remember, their flesh is like thine, and they are men like thee. Now we'll get into some more of the Christian text amongst the Mandans. The ceremony of naming children shows a wonderful coincidence with that are called Christian rites. The lips and bosom of the infant were sprinkled with water, and the Lord was implored to permit the holy drops to wash away the sin that was given to it before the foundation of the world, so that the child may be born anew. Their prayers, too, inculcated Christian morality. Wilt thou blot us out, O Lord, forever? Is this punishment intended not for our reformation, but for our destruction? Impart to us of thy great mercy thy gifts, which we are not worthy to receive through our own merits. Keep peace with all, bear injuries with humility. God who sees will avenge you. He who looks curiously on a woman commits adultery with his eyes. What parallels with scripture teachings? It's incredible. The Aztec nobles had bards in their houses who composed ballads suited to the times and sang and played on instruments in honor of the achievements of their lord. Remember, I've talked about how they found, amongst the Montezumas, they found bagpipes, they found lyres, they found small little violins, they found all kinds of, in a sense, Celtic, Scotic musical instruments. In this is discovered a resemblance to the customs of Welsh ministry. They had also musical councils held on special days in the presence of a large public assemblies for the trials of historians, poets, and musicians in their respective compositions before the monarchs of Mexico, Tezuco and Tlacopan. These were exactly identical with the Welsh bardic and musical contests, which have long been and are still held in Wales and in other countries where the descendants of the people of that country reside. They had also a complete system of orders and badges resembling those in Europe. By a study of their own stone calendars, they are known to have had regular divisions of time and their years consisted of 365 days. Historians relate that in the first interview of Cortez with Montezuma in his palace, the latter said that his ancestors were not the original proprietors of the land. They had occupied it but a few ages and had been led there by a great being who, after giving them laws and ruling over the nation for a time, had withdrawn to the region where the sun rises. He had declared upon his departure that he or his descendants would again visit them and resume his empire. The wonderful deeds of the Spaniards, their fair complexion, and the quarter whence they came, led them to believe that they were the descendants. It was this tradition, inflexibly maintained by all the natives, which enabled Cortez and his followers to secure such a complete conquest throughout the Aztec Empire. And yet so cruel a monster was he that he put to death the two emperors, Montezuma and Guatemozin. Now, I did a little talk in one of my previous videos about this Guatemozin, and that his name, like Guatemala, comes from the Gautama Buddha, and the correlation there is pretty interesting. And nearly 4 million of their subjects in the most cruel manner. Also, when it comes to talking about this sacrifice, the Montezumas, I talked about the history of chocolate, and that chocolate represented human blood, and that their sacrifices were actually made with cacao, and that the stories of the sacrificial altars were greatly exaggerated and used kind of as an excuse for this horrible destruction of a people. Again, conjecture, right? Can't prove it either way, but at any rate, he slew an immense number. 4 million. That's pretty crazy. A gentleman who was in Mexico saw in 1748 in a Spanish manuscript there the speech which Montezuma delivered to his subjects just prior to his death, and which is probably still in existence. This one's great. Kinsmen, friends, countrymen, and subjects, you know I have been 18 years your sovereign and your natural king, as my illustrious predecessors and fathers were before me, and all the descendants of my race since we came from a far distant northern nation, whose tongue and manners we yet have partly preserved. I have been to you a father, a guardian, and a loving prince, while you have been to me faithful subjects and obedient servants. Let it be held in your remembrance that you have a claim to a noble descent, because you are sprung from a race of free men and heroes who scorned to deprive the native Mexicans of their ancient liberties, but added to their national freedom principles which do honor to human nature. Our divines have instructed you of our natural descent from a people the most renowned upon earth for liberty and valor, because of all nations they were, as our first parents told us, the only subdued people upon the earth by that warlike nation, the Romans, whose tyranny and abdemnation assumed the conquest of the world. But nevertheless, our great forefathers checked their ambition and fixed limits to their conquests. Although but the inhabitants of a small island, and but few in number, compared to the ravages of earth who attempted in vain to conquer our great, glorious, and free forefathers. So this is really powerful. I talked about this a little bit in my Etruscan series when I said that the Etruscans had connections with Mexico and that they had built temples there, and that the Aztec and Etruscan were crossbreeds, half-breeds of one another. They intermarried. and that the Etruscans were at war with the Romans, quote unquote, the Romans, and that the Montezumans and his people were the only people to not be conquered by the Romans. Pretty powerful. Correlations again back with the Mediterranean. But I mean, this speech right there is just incredible. I mean, to say that the Spaniards came across a race of people that were just sacrificing thousands of people daily, but this is the speech the man gave to his people, and they went on, the Spanish, to kill 4 million of them and completely rob them of all of their historical writings and destroy their libraries. Doesn't quite add up to me. In the above, Montezuma and his people looked upon themselves as the descendants of free men. I mean, it sounds like straight up a speech given by Christ, right? And heroes who had not been subdued, who were the inhabitants of a small island in the north. The description very strikingly answers to the character, manners, and principles of the Welsh, and the place as the British island. When Cortez came to their country, Montezuma was the 11th emperor of Mexico in the Aztec line. Now, allowing an average reign to each emperor of 20 years, it will be found that Prince Madoc's arrival in this country will about coincide with the time of the establishment of this empire. This is also true with regard to the Peruvian Empire. Atahualpa, who was treacherously and inhumanely put to death by the cruel and avaricious Pizarro, was the 12th emperor of Peru in succession from Manco Capac. Now, in a video long ago, I did a correlation between Manco and Mango and showed the relation between the Tartarian king Mango and this Manco. By the same method of calculation, it will be seen that the dynasty of the Incas was established about the time of Madoc's arrival. In consequence of this, with many other proofs which cannot be introduced here, it has been maintained that he also was the founder of the Peruvian Empire. Now, throughout my Anomalous America series, I show lots of mounds had, quote, Incan artifacts. Had cloth made in the Inca manner. They had alpaca, clothing made from alpaca. They found alpaca clay dolls. So there is kind of that same hint at an intermingling. In consequence of this and many other proofs, John Williams, an author of no small repute in his Natural History of the Mineral Kingdom, maintains that not only Mexico but Peru was also discovered by Madoc, and that the few fair and white persons found there by the Spaniards were the descendants of Madoc's colony, and that Manco Capac and Mama Ocello were Madoc and his wife. They are supposed to be the progenitors of the Peruvian Incas, as they were so different from the original natives. Now, I can't remember the Peruvian capital off the top of my head, but there's a really famous map from the 1700s that shows, what's the name of it? One of the Peruvian cities was named Jerusalem and built an image of such. There's way too much to go down this rabbit hole here for this episode, which, again, we're connecting this back with the Mandans. We're showing this, kind of connecting the same web. But yeah, maybe somewhere down the line, we'll go deeper into the Peruvian Inca connection. Well, there's a little more here. Mama Ocello, he thinks, a corruption of Mama Ishel or Ushel, the Welsh for high or stately mother. He gives it as his opinion that Madoc, in his first voyage, landed in the Gulf of Mexico, and that when he went back to his native country, he promised those who he left behind to return to them. But in his second voyage, he was driven by a storm from the north down as low as Brazil, and was shipwrecked near the mouth of the Amazon River. That he and his wife and the survivors sailed up that river, and that after some time he arrived in Cusco. I have a really interesting video Sorry, real quick here. If one of my moderators could link this once I find the name of it. Lost Tribe of Israel found, 1904. This is about a lost tribe found in South America. And this will make more sense when we read the correlation between Masonry and the Welsh. But one of the links, again, supporting this Matic theory, another article. And that he never came to his first colony. He then assigns many reasons for this belief. It cannot be denied that some of those reasons are ingenious. The fact of Matic or some of his followers having reached Peru is not denied, but they reached that country from the western, not the eastern side of the continent. They went down the sea coast west of Mexico to make explorations, or were carried against their choice by a storm to Peru, where they settled. Such a theory is in harmony with the foregoing pages, while it does not in any way conflict with the founding of that empire by Prince Matic. 3 South American nations ascribe their civilization and religion to 3 white men who appeared among them. Abbe Molina, in his History of Chile, Volume 2, says that there is a tribe of Indians in Baroa, Chile, whose complexions are clear white and red. Baron Humboldt, in his political essays, remarks that in the forest of Guyana, especially near the sources of the river Orinoco, are several tribes of whitish complexion. Captain John Drummond, who resided in Mexico for many years in a military capacity as an engineer, geographer, and naturalist, favored Dr. Williams, the author of Inquiry, with his opinion on this subject. He said that he was fully persuaded and convinced that Matic was one of the Confederate chiefs who went upon an expedition westward from Britain about the year 1170, and that he has heard of colonies of Welsh people now existing, who he thinks are descendants of Matic's people, that the immigrants were a mixture of Welsh, North Britons, and Irish, and that Matic was a naval commander. This was not all unlikely, since upon Matic's return from his first voyage, he made his discoveries as public as possible. The North Britons and Irish were on friendly terms with the Welsh, and all were hostile to the English. Ewan Brecva, a bard who flourished about the year 1480, says that Riard, an illegitimate son of Owen Gwynedd, and who, according to Powell, was Lord of Clochrin in Ireland, accompanied Matic across the Atlantic to some lands they had found there, and there dwelt. And there can be no doubt, therefore, that some Irish went with Matic to America. We're going to cut this chapter a little short here and move on, just because it's quite extensive. Again, this is America discovered by the Welsh, 1170, and I'm reading from chapter 12. If you want to go further, I'm going to finish this page and move on. 132 of you, welcome again. Thanks to everybody for being here. Appreciate you so much. It is probable, too, that some Scots were in the expedition, for Captain Drummond said that at one time he was accompanied by a servant who was a Highlander on a journey through the country. What you got, bud? You boys just can't help but bust in here, huh? Your little brother already came in here, and now you're going to...
Just checking on you. Just trying to shoot
Oh.
you if you're trying to lie.
Oh, you're going to shoot me? Awesome.
Because you are making a video last time.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks for crashing the video. That's what three boys is like, okay? Hijack. Yeah. Held me at gunpoint just now, okay? All right. Where was I? Okay. It is probable, too, that some were Scots were in the expedition. For Captain Drummond said that at one time he was accompanied by his servant. Now, I've talked about the tartan of the Scots and the clothing that was worn and how it was found on Indians, quote, Indians from California all the way to Vermont to Florida. It's found in Peru, and this pattern is another great indicator, as well, again, as language and all these other things we've covered so far. For Captain Drummond said that at one time he was accompanied by a servant who was a Highlander on a journey through the country. When they came to a Mexican hut where they heard a woman singing to her child, his servant began to show signs of astonishment and turned to the captain and told him that the woman was using words from Erse, the language of the Highlands of Scotland. The captain further observed that Don Juan de Graval, a Spaniard, said that he found the Celts of Mexico, some having little or no arms but clothed in hides, and that the fierceness of their manners and their undaunted courage resembled the old Britons. He also found others with short-skirted vests of different colors, with targets and short black spears, and that these new men in Mexico were adored by the natives for their courage and dexterity, for they had never seen ships till they came from afar. So yeah, okay. Yep, we're going to stop there. Man, there's a lot of stuff in this book, though. So many books I have that I want to dive into. This one, chapter 13, goes on to talk about more correlations between the Maddox and several other tribes. But in a future read, we'll get a little deeper into this book, and we'll talk more about the Peruvian connection. Also very interesting. Okay. I'm going to read a tiny little portion from this. This is called The Migration from Shinar, or The Earliest Links Between the Old and New Continents, by George Palmer, 1829. And there is no doubt but that the Welsh colony under Prince Madoc sailed from that country in 10 vessels and reached the shores of America. They could not have been the white men south of the Esquimaux, as the latter had been spoken of 400 years before. Madoc probably reached the shores of Florida. There's actually a statue in Florida attributed to him where they say he came ashore. Madoc probably reached the shores of Florida and established himself and companions on the banks of the Mississippi and Ohio, traveling by degrees to the interior of their continent. A lot of the Cherokee describe the Welsh travelers, the bearded white men. And the Cherokee were found in Florida, Georgia, a little bit of Tennessee, a little bit of Alabama. Catlin, who gives a very minute description of the Mandan tribe of Indians, says that he believes them to be the remains of this lost colony, as we've gone over. And I'll read a little quote here. These ancient fortifications, which are very numerous in that vicinity, he's talking about the conjunction of the Mississippi and the Ohio, some of which enclose a great many acres and being built on the banks of the rivers. Excuse me. On the banks of the rivers, with walls in some places 20 or 30 feet in height. Remember, I've also done videos talking about the ancient castles. If one of my mods could link Who Built Ancient America, 1858. That one talks about these castles found all over America that looked like they'd been hit by a giant tidal wave. With covered ways to the water, evince a knowledge of the science of fortifications, apparently not a century behind that of the present day, were evidently never built by any of the nations of savages in America, and present to us incontestable proof of the former existence of a people very far in advance in the arts of civilization, who have, from some cause or other, disappeared and left these imperishable proofs of their former existence. Oh, okay. And then Life Among the Indians. This is the actual book by George Catlin, Life Among the Indians. So I'm going to paraphrase quite a bit of this, again, for the sake of time. Appreciate all of you again joining me Monday night. Dr. Longo, thanks for tuning in. Miss you, brother. The Incan Empire did not call their land Peru. They called it The 4 regions. Excellent. I'm going to read through a few comments here. More on the topic of the hidden Jewish history of Florida and ancient America. Lots of correlations there. Absolutely. Has anyone heard from Micmac? How has he been? Yeah, he posted in here earlier. Hopefully he gets back in here. The 12 tribes of Israel chart are all connected to the colonization by the Sephardic Moorish Jews. Yeah, certainly. 1492. I mean, why did Columbus sail the ocean blue in 1492? Well, he was kicked out. And the ancient tribes were already here, for sure. It's a different Ben Franklin, by the way. Not the same. I wish. That'd be pretty cool. Yeah, tartan plaid, Brett. Thank you. If you don't know who I'm talking about, you'll probably figure it out soon because they'll be saying some shit that don't go with. Okay. Not sure. What do people? The Bible says the bottom 2/3 are destroyed by God, but doesn't say that the top third was destroyed. I got a great video about the Tower of Babel in Mexico. Talk a little bit more about that, make correlations with some of the material we're covering today. Again, building a web slowly. Panama, they're called Moon Eye children, and they're all albinos. Quit spamming albinos. These intelligent people knew the difference between albino and Caucasian. Yeah, I've heard the stuff about the white race. It all comes from the albino gene. Familiar with that stuff. The home of the tribe of Dan will always be the sea. Absolutely. Yep. All right. Back to the material. So, chapter 9 here in Life Among the Indians by George Catlin. Again, this is archive.org for those that want to chase some more sources or read further along. That last book I was reading, no, the full one was America Discovered by the Welsh, Benjamin Bowen. Okay. Mandan Singularities, Mandan War Chief Lance. We are now at the village of the kind of hospitable Mandans, or as they call themselves, Sipoka Numakaki, people of the pheasants. And as we discussed earlier, the biblical correlation there. 250 miles below the mouth of Yellowstone, from which we started, a tribe of 2,000 living in a village of clay-covered wigwams on the west bank of the Missouri. My canoe and all my things are carried up by the women to the chief's wigwam, where they are to be kept in safety until I want them. And I am welcome guest while I stop, not a sixpence to pay. The Mandans, of whom I have shown you, one of their warriors, and one of whose medicine operations in rainmaking and rain stopping I have before alluded to. I considered one of the most interesting tribes I have visited, inasmuch as their language and many of their customs, as well as personal appearance, were so decidedly different from all other tribes in America. As they were not a roaming but stationary tribe, they lived in one village which was effectively protected against Indian assaults by a high and precipitous bank of the river on two sides, and a stockade of large timbers set in the ground on the back part. This tribe, not following the migrations of the herds of buffalo like the Sioux and other tribes, secured themselves against want by raising considerable fields of maize. I talk a lot about the raising of corn and the correlations, again, back to Central America and the historical significance of corn and maize, the fleur-de-lis, on and on. sufficient quantities to answer them when the buffaloes might, for a time, leave their vicinity. I've also covered in some of my Twitter posts, in some of the mounds along the Missouri River, they found ancient kernels of corn, which they planted. And the corn was unlike any corn that exists in the world today. Um, some of the corn grew 15, 16 feet tall, and the ears didn't even start exposing themselves until 6 or 7 feet up. Corn for giants, for sure. And, given again the historical origin story that they climbed the corn stalk from inner earth and came to the surface, the land of giants. This is kind of similar to the story for those of you that watched my last Anomalous America, Wisconsin, where we talked about the mining factory that was found there, and that the Phoenicians, these giant shipfarers, had a massive mining colony, and that many of these Indians were taken prisoner by these giants and forced to work in the mines. And they tell a similar story. The most striking singularities in the personal appearance of these people were those of the complexion and color of their hair and eyes. I have before said that black hair, black eyes, and cinnamon color were the national characteristics of all American savages. But to my great surprise, I found amongst the Mandans many families whose complexions were nearly white, their eyes a light blue, and their hair of a bright silvery gray from childhood to old age. This singular appearance I can account for only by the supposition that there must have been some civilized colony in some way engrafted on them, but of which neither history nor tradition seems as yet to furnish any positive proof. From having found several distinct Welsh words in use amongst them, their skin canoes round like a tub and precisely like the Welsh coracle, which we discussed earlier, and their wigwams like those in Wales, I'm strongly inclined to believe that this singularity has been caused by some colony of Welsh people who have landed on the American coast and have, after having wandered into the interior, have been taken into the hospitable tribe. The Mandans I found to be very peaceable people, not engaging in warfare except to defend their village and preserve their existence, for which they have had many hard struggles with the Sioux and the Crow Indians. When I was with the Mandans, there were living amongst them two chiefs of great distinction: the Wolf Chief, head civil chief, and Mantatopa, the Four Bears, the head war chief of the tribe. I painted the portraits at full length of these valiant and proud men, and the latter, who became very much attached to me, I shall always consider one of the most extraordinary men who has lived amongst the American tribes. He was in every way graceful, elegant, civil, and polite, and at the same time most gallant and invincible as a warrior. After I had painted his portrait, with which he was much pleased and astonished, he presented me his robe, with all the battles of his life painted on it, his wife being allowed time to make him an exact copy of it. On this extraordinary robe was he represented at full length in 14 battles in which he had been victorious, and for which he had the scalps as proof which no one could deny. When he gave me the robe, lest it should be unappreciated by me, he spread it upon the ground, and inviting me to sit down by his side of him, he proceeded to explain to me each group, the place where the battle was fought, and the manner in which he gained his success. And for each battle he showed me and placed in my hand the scalp. Several of his most celebrated warriors, who were familiar, of course, with his military exploits, were listening to his explanations and nodded assent to every scene which he described, and which I wrote down word for word in my book. And amongst those 14 achievements, there was one which described in this way. "This spear," said he, taking it up from the ground behind him and laying it on the robe, a spear of some 8 feet in length and ornamented with a number of red and white eagles, quills, and with a long blade of steel. This spear, a long blade of steel, again, they had metallurgy, but they didn't share their metallurgy with any of the other tribes. This spear once belonged to the war chief of the Rakaras, a tribe about equal in number to the Mandans and living 200 miles below them on the same bank of the river. They could also temper copper, which is incredibly important, a knowledge that was lost. The Rakaris have always been making war upon us, and in one of their cowardly midnight attacks upon our village, when a great many of our young men, as well as women and children, were killed, my brother, younger than myself, was missing, and 3 days after the battle in which we had driven our enemies away, I found the body of my brother amongst the willows, with the blade of the spear remaining in his body. I recognized the spear as belonging to the treacherous war chief of the Rakaris, having seen it and handled it when we had sat together and smoked the calumet in a treaty of peace but a few months before. Many of my warriors also recognized the spear. I preserved it with the blood of my brother's body dried on his blade, and I then swore to avenge my brother's death with my own hand. I kept the spear for 3 years, and no opportunity occurring, and unwilling to spill the blood of innocents by bringing the two tribes into conflict, I resolved to get my revenge in another way. For this purpose, I put my body and face into war paint, which a chief, by our custom, is not in the habit of doing. I took parched corn in my pouch to last me several days, and without other weapon than my spear in my hand, I started off, unknown to my people, for the Rakari village, traveling over the prairies by night and lying secreted during the day. In this manner, I came near the village on the 6th day. I secreted myself during the last day, and when it was dark, I approached and entered the village without danger of being detected. Knowing the wigwam of the war chief, I loitered about and often peeped in and saw him seated by the fire smoking his pipe. His wife at length went to bed, and after he sat and smoked out another pipe by himself, he went to bed also. The time for me had then arrived, and the fire was almost out, and the wigwam quite dark. I gently opened the door and walked in with my spear in my hand and sat down by the fire. There was a pot hanging over the fire with some meat in it, which I commenced eating, as I was almost starved to death. Whilst I was eating, I heard his wife ask him what man that was eating from the pot in their wigwam, to which the chief replied, "No matter, I suppose the man is hungry." After I had sated my hunger, I very gradually stirred the fire with a little with my foot until I got just the light enough to see my way to my enemy. When I arose and drove the lance to his heart, I darted from the wigwam with the lance in one hand and his scalp in the other, and made my way as fast as possible towards the Mandan village, without their knowing where their enemy was from or which way he had gone. I traveled fast all that night and lay secreted during the following day, and so traveled night after night until I entered the Mandan village in triumph, with the scalp of the war chief resting on the point of my own spear. "This, my friend," he said, "is the scalp of that enemy, and this is the spear which I drew blood from body of my brother, and with which I believe it was the will of the Great Spirit I should avenge his death. You see, my friend, that I have done it, and the blood of both is now dried upon the blade. This, my friend, was unlike the deeds of Matatopa, but I went to slay a dog who died as he deserved. Though he was a war chief and he had many scalps, he was not an honorable man. He hung about our village like the sneaking wolves in the night, and even scalped our women and children when they were bathing off the shore." So he's talking about the chief, the war chief he killed. "If he had been an honorable man, Matahopa would have given him a chance for his life in equal combat. But as his life had been that of a coward, it would not have been just that he should die the death of a brave man." I'm going to stop there just wanted to finish that story. Kind of give you a little insight into the chief. Like he said, quality people, unlike many other tribes in that war. We got 20 minutes before I want to call it a day here. 139 of you. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. I have 3 long ones here, and I don't have time for them. So, this one called the Welsh Indians. This is from like 1803, and this is a story told by a Cherokee Indian about the Welsh tribes that are found from Florida all the way into the Northeast and as west as they had known. And I don't have time for this one. It's like a full page. But yeah, it's a good one. Not to tease you. I'll do a little bit of this one. Mm-hmm. This is 1825. Proofs of the existence of the institution of Freemasonry among the North American Indians prior to the discovery of the country by Columbus. Those signs of Freemasonry which modern travelers have found are also thought to be of Welsh origin. This connects again with my Anomalous America, California, and Arizona episodes where, quote, modern-day Freemasons were buying trinkets off Indians in California and Arizona that had the square and compass carved into them. They were considered to be the most ancient relics of Masonry, for which these Masons in the 1800s had no explanation to attribute how these people had these artifacts and had these emblems. Same thing goes all the way into Mexico. And again, that video I linked earlier. Masonry existed long before the Masonry we know of today. Those signs of Freemasonry which modern travelers have found are also thought to be of Welsh origin. Travelers describe certain private societies among the Indians which apparently resemble our lodges of Freemasons. Their rules of government and admission of members are said to be nearly the same. No one can receive a member, a fraternity, except by ballot, and a concurrence of the whole is necessary to a vote. They have different degrees in order. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit more here. The ceremonies of initiation and the mode of passing from one degree to another would create astonishment in the mind of an enlightened spectator. Is not this practice of European origin? In early periods of English history, the knowledge of Freemasonry was mostly confined to the Druids, and Wales was more fruitful of this description of men than any other part of Europe. They were almost the only men of learning in those days. They executed the functions of priests, historians, and legislators. Those in Wales in particular animated their countrymen to a noble defense of their liberties and afforded so much trouble to the first Edward to order them to be barbarously massacred. Yeah, this ferocious tyranny was carried into effect about the year 1282. Few only of the bards survived to weep over the miseries of their country. But a similar institution, it is said, prevails among the Iroquois Indians. These have never been suspected to be of Welsh extraction. Now, maybe in the future days of this channel, I'll talk about the founding fathers and how they got the Constitution from the Iroquois. The American Constitution we know of, the laws and governance, was the way that the Iroquois governed their people. Very interesting. Still, they have derived the signs from those who were. So did we receive our Constitution from these Iroquois who got it from the Welsh, as well as the Constitution, Declaration of Independence? We received the information from Governor Clinton, to whom it was communicated by a respectable Indian preacher, who received the signs of the mystery from a Mahone chief. The institution, therefore, must be prevalent among the Mahones as well as other Indians. In this secret institution among the Indians, the members are very select. Among the Iroquois, the society consists of 5 Oneidas, 2 Cayugas, 2 St. Regis, and 6 Senecas. They are said to have secret signs and pretend that their institution has existed from eternity. The period of their meetings is unknown, but they assemble once in 3 years as deputies under pretense of other business. If the Welsh Indians could be identified as descendants of Maddox's colony, or if the Allegheny could be ascertained to have been Welsh, the discovered traces of civilization, Christianity, and the arts might partly be referred to their instrumentality. But the pre-existence of inhabitants when Maddox is supposed to have arrived, the crown population, for instance in Ohio 700,000 as Mr. Atwater has conjectured, which formerly swarmed over this continent, preclude the presumptions that Maddox's colony, 322 years before Columbus, were the first settlers, or that they were and their descendants were the sole constructors of all the mounds, temples, and fortifications. Now, I certainly don't agree with that. I again, what I'm trying to do here is bridge the gap and show that all of these pre-Columbian cultures had Christian roots or values. Again, Christian is a more modern term. And that their origin stories, flood myths, creation stories, Adam and Eve, that the Garden of Eden was within the earth, and that they came to the surface and got trapped here. That they all have similar stories, and that Masonry is no different, coming from a similar source. They have contributed to swell the tide of population from the north of Europe. This is in the opinion of Delet, Orneas, and Mitchell, and may have aided in the construction, the fortifications, and works which bear so strong a resemblance to those of their own country. But limited must be the views that would circumscribe the origin of myriads who have swarmed over this continent to the narrow confines of Wales. So yeah, just like the similarities in language and construction and historical origins, Masonry would be no different. And again, check my videos and you'll find plenty of stuff. We're going to finish up the video tonight with a curious story. This is kind of a little bit of a story about Welsh Bibles found in America. This is from 1883. Thanks for joining me on this Monday night, guys. Bit of a long one here. Lots of reading. Appreciate your patience. Kids popping in a little bit or interruptions here and there. But yeah, let's knock this one out and call it a night. A curious story about a Welsh settlement in this country in the year 1170. In a lecture delivered by Mr. James Wood of Albany, New York, he related the following curious tradition which exists among the Welsh. In 1170, 2 brothers, David and Maddox, quarreled for the throne. The younger, Maddox, becoming disgusted, gave up the struggle and fitting out a ship sailed west. The next year he returned and said he had discovered a fruitful country and called upon his friends to follow him. He had no difficulty in filling 10 ships with men, women, and children. They sailed away, and according to the Welsh story, were never heard of again. This would not be worth much as history, were it not that it seems confined by evidence found upon this side of the ocean. In 1670, 500 years after Prince Maddox left Wales, a Welsh minister named Morgan was sent from New York to North Carolina to preach to some Welsh people who settled there. He remained with them some time. One day he wandered too far beyond the outskirts of the settlement and was captured by Indians. They took him away many miles inland and prepared to burn him at the stake. The faggots were piled up around him, and his doom seemed sealed. Suddenly he exclaimed in Welsh, "Have I come so far to die like a dog at last?" To his surprise, the Indian chief sprung forward, loosed his bonds, and embraced him, crying in Welsh, "No, not if you speak that language." Henceforth he was honored guest of the tribe. Morgan's surprise deepened when the principal members of this Indian tribe gathered around him and began to converse with him in Welsh. He preached to them and they understood him. But what amazed him most was to discover they had a manuscript copy of the Bible in the Welsh language. Now, the Mandans also, they didn't have a full book, but they had scripts, paper scripts of the Bible. Morgan relates this story in a letter sent to friends in Wales. This letter is well authenticated, but it is only evidence that we have in the matter. So far as we are aware, nothing more was ever heard of this Indian tribe who spoke Welsh and had a Welsh Bible. But about 15 or 20 years later, when an explorer party returning beyond the Mississippi River relate among other wonders that they have found a tribe of Indians who speak the Welsh language. They too have a manuscript copy of the Welsh Bible. None of their numbers can read it, and they keep it as a mysterious treasure, carefully rolled up in the skins of animals. And 15 or 20 years later, still, another explorer party brings us back strange news from the Red River of the North. They have found there a singular people with whitened hair and blue eyes. These people speak the Welsh language. Lastly, Catlin speaks of a tribe of white Indians dwelling along the upper course of the Missouri. They are different from the tribes around them. Some have fair hair and blue eyes, and their language is strangely mixed with a great number of Welsh words. Now, says Mr. Wood, here we have 5 independent accounts which seem to tell one story. They are so strange that historians don't know what to do with them. But if Indians on the American continent can speak the Welsh language, they must have been taught at some time. If there are manuscript copies of the Welsh Bible here, they must have come here somehow, and you can put the facts together as you please. Another curious fact was stated by the lecturer in speaking to the discoveries of John Cabot. He said, in substance, "Here is a strange thing. John Cabot reached the shores of Newfoundland in 1497, only 5 years after Columbus set sail. He found that the Indians were in possession of a great number of French words and could understand him when he spoke to them in that language. They knew the French term for codfish and fishing. He soon learned that the Briton fishermen from the rock-bound coast of northern France were in the habit of coming to these bleak American shores in their little fishing smacks and catching the cod which these waters abounded." Remember, this was only 5 years after the time of Columbus. If these fearless fishermen and their frail vessels had been traveling backwards and forwards across the ocean long enough to teach the Indians good part of their language, who knows whether or not they saw the continent of America even before Columbus? Well, of course we know. Long before. But yeah, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks again for tuning in, guys. Appreciate all of you. We'll read through some comments here to finish up the night. And again, for those that hadn't heard so far, Thursday, December 4th, Anomalous America, North Dakota. Same time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. It's going to be a good one. Follow along on Instagram and Twitter, as I'll be posting a kind of inside peek at the format and material that I'll be covering. Wait, fishermen able to travel quickly and easily from the UK to America? Yeah. I mean, the Basque, like who are the Basque? I've talked about them quite a lot over the years. They were trading, Mr. Micmac, if he was here, they were trading and fishing all along the western coast of America. So to say they quickly made the trip, anybody that's made that journey by plane or by boat knows it's certainly not quick, but yeah, very interesting nonetheless. Columbus met American Indians in 1472. Yep. Yep. Quote, American Indians were traveling to Europe long before, we're told. Again, there were many groups that had mastered the oceans and sailing. Beringians are the key. Beringians. Interesting. Thanks for your comment. I'll check into that. The founding fathers borrowed many political ideas from the native people. They should have adopted them. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you caught that. All right, guys, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. Appreciate all of you. And yeah, look forward to more to come. Hopefully see all of you on Thursday. It's been a long time since I did an Anomalous America. Let's see real quick here. When was the last one? Over a year ago, episode 23, Michigan. We'll tie into Michigan a little bit and kind of do a little refresher on the stuff we covered because it's going to correlate. And we'll talk about the Mandans and all kinds of stuff, giants. And yeah. Thanks again for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your week, and hopefully I'll see all you guys back here on Thursday. Have a wonderful night. God bless.